First. Achievement First is a network of 37 charter schools serving 14,000 students in New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. We are committed to providing our scholars with the best education possible and supporting their academic and personal development as they go on to success in college and in life. Our students are predominantly African American and Latino, and we work in urban areas in those three states. My trajectory, my commitment in work and education really in some ways started in college, but fundamentally it started before that. I grew up in New York City, in East New York, Brooklyn. East New York is a neighborhood in Eastern Brooklyn, predominantly Black and Latino, low income and working class community. And I was lucky to have great educational experiences, which unfortunately were not the norm for young people in East New York. And part of it is because the quality of our local schools have just been struggling for a long time. Poor reading scores, poor math scores, low graduation rates, low college attainment rates. In a community that was suffering a range of challenges, public health challenges, criminal justice system involvement. One of the 7 neighborhoods in New York City that contribute 70% of the New York State prison population. So a range of challenges of which the poor educational system was somewhat foundational. But I was lucky for a bunch of reasons. My mom was a public school teacher in the neighborhood, and so she knew how to navigate the educational system. And I was also lucky that I was a good test taker. I attended a middle school in Bushwick, a public middle school called IF 383. IF 383 is also known as the Philippa Schuyler School. It's a gifted and talented school that serves predominantly Black and Latino children from Eastern Brooklyn and Central Brooklyn. And then I got into Stuyvesant, which is one of New York City's marquee high schools. It's one of the specialized high schools that admits students on the basis of the test. And I was one of a few Black and Latino students to attend. Sadly, the numbers of students who attended have gotten lower over the years. So I feel that as background to say, by the time I got to college, I was particularly aware of the educational disparities and the opportunity disparities that existed in New York City. In the neighborhood where I grew up in East New York, it was clear that young people were not set up for success. Young people did not have the educational resources, the networks, all the things that young people need to thrive. But as I went to Stuyvesant, it was my first time really becoming aware that what I experienced in East New York and in Bushwick was not the norm, was not the way it had to be. That in fact, New York City actually operated an amazing public school system. It's just that that system was not available to everyone. So every day I sort of had this hour-long subway ride between East New York and Stuyvesant. And it was like taking a train between two different realities on a daily basis. And that for me sparked anger and confusion. But I didn't necessarily know what to do with that anger and confusion. I don't know that I had a theory of the case that I was going to spend my life in education. But I knew that something was wrong. I knew that I was getting something that other kids weren't getting. I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't fair. I knew I wasn't special. But yet, I was being treated differently than the other kids that I knew in East New York. So all that to say, I guess I was primed for an opportunity to find a way to do something with the anger and confusion I was feeling. And I was lucky to find that in college. And really just by serendipity. I had a friend who was volunteering in an after-school program at a housing project in Boston called Mission Hill Houses in Roxbury. And she asked me, invited me to come volunteer with the kids one day. So I said, sure. Started visiting this after-school program, and I just fell in love with it. The kids were fantastic. Mission Hill reminded me in a lot of ways of the neighborhood that I grew up in East New York. And so I started volunteering a day a week and then 2 days a week. And by the end of my spring semester of my freshman year, I was there 4 days a week volunteering, 3 days a week during the school week, and then spending my Saturdays taking them on field trips, doing tutoring, homework help, and exploring Boston with them. So after my freshman year, I came back and was so excited to see the kids again, asked them what they were doing for their summer, and for the most part, the kids had done nothing all summer. They hung around, watched TV, hung out in the neighborhood, and just sparked something in me. Sort of the same lack of opportunity that I saw facing most kids in East New York. It was the same lack of opportunity, the same lack of resources these kids were going to face this summer, because we know that opportunities for summer learning are critical to helping young people continue their learning and development. In fact, it's the lack of those opportunities are one of the key drivers of the achievement gap we see between wealthier students and low-income students. So some friends and I started a summer camp for them. We raised money, we got local university to give us classroom space. We got the Boston Housing Authority to give us an apartment so that we could live in development during the summer. And we read with them, we went camping with them, we took them to visit other cities, we spoke with them. And for me, it was a transformative experience because it helped me see that the changes that I was so angry about, the changes that had so flustered me and frustrated me growing up, the changes that I was angry about, even the challenges that I was angry about seeing, even in Roxbury. That experience helped me see that you could do something about it. You didn't just have to look at the problem. You could organize resources. You could recruit people. You could break the problem apart, and you could work to solve the problem. And I didn't have the language for it then, but that's when I decided I wanted to be a social entrepreneur. So my career, the problem was I didn't know how to be a social entrepreneur. After college, after doing that program while I was in college, I taught in Zimbabwe for a year. I worked in local politics in Cambridge. I went to law school, not because I wanted to be a lawyer, but because I didn't really, I didn't know what else to do, and going to law school seemed like a reasonable way to spend some time. I actually loved law school. I practiced civil rights law briefly, but I had a great opportunity shortly after law school to start a nonprofit called iMentor. Again, trying to solve a problem, the lack of mentoring opportunities for young people, when we know that mentoring can be a critical part of young people's development, and the lack of supports around college access, because we know that in the average university school, there are 400 students to one college counselor. And so I co-founded this organization called iMentor, which works with young people by connecting them to volunteer mentors who help support them in their personal development, but also help counsel them on the pathway to college. I ran iMentor for a few years. I still serve on the board today. From iMentor, I started another organization called Groundwork. Groundwork works with children and families in public housing in East New York, Brooklyn, and similarly works with them and families in a comprehensive way to try to put their young people on a path towards college and life success through a range of programs, academic, social, recreational, and otherwise. And after running Groundwork for 8 years, I joined the Children's Aid Society, one of New York City's largest social service agencies. At Children's Aid Society, we similarly help to reframe that organization's work. It's a child welfare organization that's been doing amazing work for 160 years. It's the organization that started the first school feeding program in America, the first foster care program in America. And at Children's Aid Society, we really, among other things, work to improve our educational and academic impact by being driven by the things that we know make a difference over the long term, particularly for our most vulnerable children. So that included things like expanding our work in early childhood, our Head Start and early Head Start programs, launching a charter school which is designed to serve high-need students in the South Bronx, and thinking about ways to integrate our academic work with the social development work that the Children's Aid Society is known for. And after running Children's Aid for 5 years, after working at the Children's Aid Society for 5 years, where I was having a great experience, I got asked by Bill de Blasio, who was just elected mayor of New York City, to join the administration as the deputy mayor. And among other things, a big part of my portfolio, and certainly the priority for my first 2 years in City Hall, was to lead New York City's expansion of pre-K for all. So the mayor's, his primary campaign promise in running for office was to provide free, full-day, high-quality pre-kindergarten for every 4-year-old in New York City. At the time, there were about 19,000 4-year-olds enrolled in full-day pre-kindergarten, and we estimated that there would be about 70,000 4-year-olds who would take us up on an offer of full-day pre-K. And the mayor had promised to do that in a year and a half. And so this was a big task. Frankly, it was not one that most folks thought we could pull off. It was frankly not a task that I was sure we could pull off, but we did. Right now, New York City offers full-day pre-kindergarten to every 4-year-old in New York City. That's about 70,000 children who sign up every year. We've since expanded that program to 3-year-olds as well. We're not fully at universal 3-year-old program, but that program is growing every year. Although unfortunately, the expansion has been slowed down as a result of the budget crisis stemming from the COVID pandemic. And at City Hall, I got a chance to work on and lead a great array of programs at city agencies. I led the expansion of after-school programs so that we provide free after-school programs to every middle school student in New York City. I helped create a new city agency, the Department of Veterans Services, as well as a new city office, the Mayor's Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises, which has worked to significantly increase access for minority and women-owned businesses to city contracting. And under our leadership, we exceeded $1 billion in contracting with MWBEs for the first time in our history, more than double the amount when we came to city government, and got to lead and work on a range of city agencies, from the Department of Aging to the Department of Probation. It was a great experience with big challenges, and I stayed in the administration for the first term and left to lead policy and public affairs at KIPP, which is the nation's largest charter school network, serving over 100,000 children in over 240 schools in 20 states and DC. And just a few weeks ago, I left to join Achievement First, an organization, as I said, which works in Brooklyn, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. It's an organization I've been close to for a long time. Its co-founder is a friend of mine from law school, so circling back 25 years, and it's an organization that I supported when it first came to New York. It was started in New Haven by a group of law school graduates, and when it expanded to Brooklyn in its first wave of expansion, I was the chair of the board locally in Brooklyn, and many years later, I find myself back as president of the organization. You know, the fundamental challenge we face, and our problems are huge. Racism is huge. Wealth inequality is huge. The challenges facing public education are huge. But like any other big problem, I found in my life that you can address big problems if you break them down to their constituent parts and try to keep your eye on the big picture and on the small picture at the same time. Just to give an example with pre-K, looking at that challenge of how do you build a public school, essentially we were adding a grade to the New York City public school system in a year and a half, right? And that expansion of our pre-K program is bigger than the public school system in Boston, bigger than the public school system in San Francisco. And you know, one of the reasons why it feels so intimidating is because that feels so big. Not only doing that work, but doing it with quality, and doing it in an environment where there was a great deal of public scrutiny, because as a new mayor who had made this big and audacious promise, there are a lot of people who are looking to our failure, who wanted to see that program fail, because they wanted to see the mayor fail, because they wanted to see progressive leadership in the city fail. So these things are absolutely big challenges. And so what we try to do with pre-K as an example is just to break it down into constituent parts. So what do you have to do to create a pre-K system for 70,000 children in a year and a half? Well, the first thing you have to do is get the money, because that's expensive. So one constituent challenge is what was essentially a political campaign to get the state to invest resources in our pre-K program. And that was a political work that was successful, with a lot of fighting and a lot of advocacy. We got the state to create a grant program that essentially gave New York City $300 million a year to expand pre-K. So part of it was getting the money. A big part of it was getting the spaces. So where are these kids going to sit? And that was also a complex problem that we broke into constituent parts. So part of that was about New York City public school seats. So literally scouring every building in New York City to identify where were their rooms, where were their space, whether it be in rooms that were being used in office or as offices or other spaces, and what could we capture to put little 4-year-old seats in, as well as public space, as well as private spaces. So finding Catholic schools that we could rent and take over and turn into pre-K centers, contracting with nonprofits in New York and small businesses that were operating daycare centers and other programs that might be able and willing to expand, to go from 1 classroom to 3 classrooms to 4 classrooms. So having a comprehensive process of securing these 3 seats through RFP, and doing it in the neighborhoods that we know children were. And so again, there was a team that was focused on finding seats in public schools, finding seats in private spaces that New York City could take over, and finding seats in private providers by having an RFP process to create pre-K programs or to expand pre-K programs we might already be offering. So that was a big part of the job. We had to make sure that all of that was done safely. And so that required really revisiting how New York City goes about the process of inspecting and certifying spaces ready to open. And the short version is, to open a pre-K center requires really a dizzying array of inspections and certifications from different city agencies, as it should be, right? We need these classrooms to be safe and secure. And the problem is that is a process that can be very burdensome and very bureaucratic. As a provider, you've got to go to the health department and do their paperwork. You got to go to the fire department and do their inspection. Often, one inspection has to happen after the other inspection. It can be difficult to coordinate between the buildings department and the health department and all these other agencies that play a role in certifying safety. And so we had to turn that process on its head, and rather than putting the onus on individual providers to go out and chase this bureaucracy down, we brought the bureaucracy together. And because we knew which centers we need open, we know who we awarded contracts to, required those centers to take on responsibility for coordinating among themselves and making sure that all the agencies that needed to come came at the right time, did what they need to do. And also, what was unprecedented for us, when we didn't think that the agency could remedy problems in time, use city resources to go in and remedy the problem. So we needed to fix the plumbing, and the provider couldn't do it, we would come do it. So thinking about a new approach to safety. It also required, we had to get teachers. We had to recruit 4,000 teachers and teachers assistants. In that way, we're lucky to be New York City, and that it's a place that people want to come and work. And so we had a nationwide recruitment campaign. We had to build new systems for recruiting and screening teachers effectively, and making sure that we were connecting teachers to providers, many of whom were private providers, to make sure that classrooms had quality, loving, talented, trained teachers in front of them. We had to get the curriculum. So we had a whole team that was thinking about, what does a quality pre-K program look like? A pre-K program that is centered in what we know about child development, that is centered in play. And how do we build capacity to go out and train all these teachers and all these program administrators in building the kind of program that we knew we wanted to build? And so we had a team that was focused on that. And in some ways, the part that maybe is the least obvious, but is was very real is we had to get the parents. There's the movie, what's the Kevin Costner movie, the baseball, Field of Dreams, where um, he's hearing the voice in his head, Shoeless Joe Jackson saying, if you build it, they will come. We couldn't assume that if we built the pre-K system, that all of a sudden an additional 55,000 families are going to know that that pre-K system is there. They're going to know how to apply for it. They're going to trust it. And so we had a huge effort, which was essentially a campaign effort to figure out how do we recruit all these families, encourage them that pre-K is a good thing, and make it easy for them to sign up. And so, like you said, we had to break it down to its constituent parts. And we just built and organized really talented teams of people to go after them and get those things done. So we had to go out and recruit parents and families, and we faced a number of barriers, everything from ensuring that families in temporary housing had access to programs to managing language barriers and cultural barriers for some families who felt that 4-year-old is too young to have their children in an organized educational setting, to building what had been a very disconnected and disorganized way of enrollment, where basically in the past, every center did its own enrollment. We had to build a unified and centralized enrollment system so that we could effectively track and manage how enrollments were going. And we built an entire team, the pre-K outreach team, which has since become a model for how New York City approaches enrollment for other things like the census or other things where we're trying to get lots of New Yorkers to respond and do something quickly. But at the heart of all these things it was a team. The truth is that New York City has amazing people, amazing public servants who work in the city. And when we set this big challenge before them, and we let them know that we were serious, we let them know we were going to resource it to get it done, we were really able to unleash extraordinary talent and enthusiasm around these lines of work. And we delivered what I think is one of the biggest public service victories we've seen as a city over the last few years. And for me, what it really reinforces is that big things are possible in city government when you have a big vision, when you put the resources toward the vision, and when you unleash the talent of public servants to execute on that vision. Yeah, something that has always struck with me, there are many things that Brian Stevenson has said that have struck with me, but one of the things that he talks about often is the importance of proximity and being proximate to the work. And I think the danger in seeking solutions is that seeking solutions without engagement, is that it can be easy as a professional, as a so-called expert, at a distance to analyze a solution, to think you understand the problem, when in fact the core of the problem and the core of the solutions generally reside in the place where the people are who need to be served. And so having an orientation that you need to be close to the problem to understand it, and you need to hear community voice in order to solve it, is, I think, the basic lesson of anyone who is engaged in public service. And so I'll give an example from my life right now. Achievement First, like all educational communities around the country, is struggling to figure out how to safely reopen in the fall, and whether we can safely physically reopen in the fall. And it would be easy for us to sort of sit in our offices, or really at this point in our apartments, and to try to think we understand the challenge. But what we did is we went out and have been talking to our families, thousands of families, through different modalities, through town halls, through one-on-one calls, through small group meetings, through surveys, to try to understand what do they need. And what we've learned is different than what we thought. Just as an example, there are fewer young people, fewer children who want in-person school than we thought, but also the reasons why they want in-person school is different than what we thought. And the reason why they want in-person school is different than what we thought. For example, we thought the biggest driver was childcare, and that's a part of it. But one of the biggest reasons why parents want their young people to go to in-person school is when they feel that their young person has struggled either with remote learning, like it hasn't worked for them, they feel like they're not learning remotely, or a social emotional needs, that they just feel that they want their young people to be with their friends. So that was important to understand, because the way we approach everything from communications with parents to the kind of things that we build in terms of real life experiences is different, because we understand what it is that parents want. So it's an important lesson that the knowledge expertise lives in the communities that we serve. It lives with the public. And the trick is never losing the mindset to listen to those communities as you make decisions. But that really requires discipline and institutionalization of practices that is not necessarily the norm for city government or large institutions. And so the discipline of being proximate, I think, is critical to making better and smarter decisions. It's interesting. There's a range of technical skills that you need. But the truth is that the nature of large public problems is that they involve a range of technical skills. So to some extent, you should pursue the technical skills that you're most passionate about, whether it's engineering or systems design or communications or legal skills. Because if you're working on big problems, we're going to need all those things, right? We're going to need engineers, we're going to need curriculum designers, we're going to need public communications professionals, we're going to need educators. So one thing I would say is you find your passion, find what you love, and there's going to be a place for you in the work of solving the world's problems. But there are some things that I do think are universal. Whatever your job is, you need to be able to communicate. To communicate in writing, to communicate verbally, because fundamentally, even in a Zoom world, and maybe even more in a Zoom world, this is the way we relate to each other. We can't bring those teams together. We can't bring that expertise together unless we have an effective way of communicating with each other. So whatever you're doing, I would invest in my writing ability, my communication skills. That's sort of one. I think another, and I'm reluctant to call it a skill, it's an attribute, but it's one that is not universal, is really just being a nice person. The work can be so stressful, it's so overwhelming. And it's work that generally doesn't come with big paychecks and generally doesn't come with big fame. And so if you're going to do this work, at minimum, it should be joyous. And so approaching the work with empathy, with love, with genuine affection, with a commitment to being a good person and working well with others, playing well in a sandbox together. Building that discipline in yourself, seeking out places and teams where you see those disciplines, I think are critical to being success. The truth is that, the challenges we face as a city, as a country, as a world are huge. But this work is deeply rewarding. I've been able to meet some of the most amazing people I've ever met, working with smart public servants who are trying to solve complex problems together. I've been able to get so much personal pride. I mean, I still walk around New York City and I see pre-K for all signs, and I know that I played a part in that. These are highs that I don't think you get in many other places doing many other things. So I'm a big booster of this work. It needs great talent now more than ever. And it doesn't pay with fame, but it certainly pays with a sense of impact and accomplishment. And it's left me with wonderful relationships that I know I'll always treasure.